Hello, and welcome to the Community IT Innovators Technology Topics Podcast, where we discuss nonprofit technology, cybersecurity, tech project implementation, strategic planning, and nonprofit IT careers. Find us at communityit.com. Thank you for joining this Community IT Podcast Part 2. You can find Part 1 in your podcast feed if you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.
Welcome, everyone, to the Community IT Innovators webinar on staffing IT positions at nonprofits. We get a lot of questions from our clients and from nonprofits in general about how to find good IT staff, how to write job descriptions, how to know what staff positions you need, and when it makes sense to build an in-house IT department and when it makes sense to outsource some or all of your IT support. We also get questions about specialized IT roles and whether you must have an IT background to be able to manage nonprofit IT. So I'm excited today to moderate this question and this conversation and try to tackle all of those questions. Our learning objectives for this session are that after this session, you should be able to be familiar with typical IT descriptions and roles at nonprofits, learn typical experience and qualifications for nonprofit IT roles, understand in general when to outsource and when to build talent in-house and when to hire.
My name is Johan and Hammerstrom. I'm the CEO at Community IT.
My name is Nura Aboki. I'm an IT business manager and a senior consultant at Community IT.
My name is Carolyn Woodard. I'm in charge of outreach at Community IT, and I'm going to be helping Johan and Nura today and monitoring the Q&A. We got a couple good questions in the chat, but we're going to save them to the end because I think that you're going to get to them. But one kind of question that's related is, if you, while we're still talking about roles and hiring people, if you are in a situation where you have some kind of catastrophe, so a person has left, a person, there's some kind of, just issue, and you need somebody fast. Do you guys have any thoughts or ideas on like what your next step is at that point when you've identified there's a pretty big problem around your IT staff? What you do next?
Well, I think there's two answers to that question. There's the how do you plant the tree today answer, and there's the here's what you could have done to plant the tree 20 years ago answer. And I'll start with the latter, and that kind of leads into the former. So I think IT continuity is something that is vital to think about as you're working on positions and responsibilities in your organization, in the same way that you would think about financial management continuity. So if your key finance staff were to leave, how would you cover for their departure? And hopefully you would have some other resources that you could rely on that could cover for you. And you'd probably look at outsourcing, at least on an interim basis. If you had a relationship already with a financial management firm, with an accountant, the firm that's doing your audits, that you might be able to, have those firms come in and provide the bridge that you need. For really large organizations, hopefully you have multiple IT staff, and the departure of a key staff person can be covered by the other staff until that position is replaced. If you don't, it just sort of, it is a good reminder of the value of establishing a partnership with an external IT support provider who knows the systems and the network and can kind of step up on short notice to provide more support. And I think in general, like if you're in the situation now, that would probably be the best move to make, is that because you'll probably be able to get someone to come in, an IT support provider to come in a little bit more quickly than you would be able to hire and staff the position, depending on how the job market is at that point in time. And then once you've established that relationship, depending on the nature of the agreement, that might be something that would add value over a long period of time and provide greater sort of continuity and stability over time. So in terms of, so the IT manager role, reporting out of IT and up to someone in an operations or finance role, makes sense for a little while in the life of an organization. But at some point, because basically what you're expecting in that sort of arrangement is that the director level responsibilities, which are more around budgeting and planning and developing the long-term roadmap, that the director or vice president, whoever the IT manager is reporting to, that they're able to handle the director level responsibilities as it regards IT. That should be built into their job description if they're supervising an IT manager. And that should be a clear and acceptable expectation of the work that they're doing. At some point, whether the organization gets large enough or whether the role of IT gets important enough, that may no longer be feasible. It may not make sense at some point for someone in a finance or operations role to be responsible for IT at that director level, developing IT policies and so forth. That's the point at which you need to start thinking about creating an IT director position, because you've got enough IT responsibilities at a senior enough level that it requires its own dedicated position. We probably see that in organizations that have, or are over 100 staff, or organizations that are under 100 staff, but for whom IT is a central part of the work that they do. They're collecting data. It's like a critical, part of their mission revolves around data collection and management. That, those are the sorts of scenarios where we see real value in having an in-house IT director position established.
Yes, I totally agree with you from recent experience, I would say. And then for the IT manager and IT director, the IT director, depending on how large the organization is, they may have an IT department that has a structure where there's a systems administrator, a network engineer, an IT manager, an IT director. So you have that chain of or hierarchy that everyone has a responsible role within the organization in terms of IT. And then the IT director does interface and work on big picture thinking, planning, working on strategy for the organization. So what about the CIO role? I am seeing, what does it even mean? What is it to you, Johan?
Yeah, the CIO role, you can kind of push the analogy to the next level as you think about the CIO role. So your IT director is probably reporting to the COO, VP of operations. The titling can be different depending on how the organization is structured. But ideally, the IT director is reporting to someone at an executive level who's on the senior leadership team. That person is not solely, technology is not their sole responsibility. They're probably also responsible for operations. They may be responsible for finance as well. If it makes sense for IT to be represented at the senior-most level of the company as part of a portfolio of responsibilities that includes finance and operations, then you don't really need a CIO. But at some point, if technology becomes so central to the requirements of the organization that it needs to have its own unique and specific voice and representation at the senior-most levels of the company, that's where it makes sense to start bringing in a CIO. Another way to think about it is how central is IT to the business strategy of the organization. Should IT be centrally incorporated into the strategic planning that the organization does? Or does the strategic planning happen and then that plan is given to IT and IT is expected to support the execution of that strategic plan through technology, which is completely valid. Both are valid ways of doing it, and it really depends on both the needs and the size of the organization. So we've worked with organizations that have several thousand staff, and in our experience, those types of organizations need to have a CIO. There's so much complexity of managing IT for thousands of people in multiple regions and multiple offices and so forth, that a CIO is vital. It can be a critical role at smaller organizations, 100 to 500 staff, but not always. I think one of the things we would caution against is, and this doesn't seem to happen as much anymore, but for a long time, we saw the CIO title being sort of given out as a incentive to keep IT staff from leaving. So an IT director may feel like, I need to advance in my career, and I think it's time for me to get the CIO title. I think it's important that title be reserved for that specific situation where the IT responsibility is operating at the senior most executive level of the company, of the nonprofit.
That makes so much sense. Thank you. I want to make sure that we have time at the end for questions. So I'm going to hurry you a little bit along, but I think that's a great segue into strategy and roadmap. So.
Yes. Thank you, Carolyn. So Nura, does everyone need an IT roadmap? Is that an essential?
I would say yes, but it depends. As most consultants will argue that it depends. However, in today's world, having a roadmap really gives you an idea of the types of technology solutions that you would need currently and in the future, and it gives you a way to think about all the possible growth potential of the organization, adoption of the technology itself, and how, at what point you should roll them out or introduce them to your organization. So having a roadmap, if an organization has the capacity to develop one, certainly they should go and find the capacity, or if they have the capacity to develop that IT roadmap. So to answer your question, I started with yes, it depends, but I'm back to yes. Everyone should have a roadmap.
At what point should an organization reach out to an IT support company or a consultant to help them with the roadmap? At what point is this something that organizations can do on their own? And when does it make sense for them to bring in third-party support?
So to answer the latter question, bringing in a third party, the size of the organization, the need of the organization in terms of being technology heavy, they look at each of their business units or departments and realizing that if we don't have a good handle, we're going to have every department running their technology without any guidance or direction. We want to harmonize, we want to provide some leadership in terms of the type of solutions that the organization should be rolling out. If you have departments or business units or teams using their own technology without any oversight, without any guidance, that could be very difficult to manage. So at that point in time, even before then, if you are in that bucket of organizations that are having this kind of challenge right now, reach out to an IT consultant. IT consulting companies can bring their experience to help you develop a roadmap that will address the issue, possibly assess the current IT technologies, solutions that you have in place, and then work with you to ask you about your business mission, vision, goals, as well as help you develop that IT roadmap. But on the for the former, when you are if you want to develop it yourself, you must have the understanding of your business and the technical background to actually put together that roadmap. Because it requires really knowing what is the next big thing, where is the industry going, what are some of the technological improvements that can help your organization achieve your mission better and more effectively. So I would say if you have the capacity, fine. But we find organizations reaching out to IT consultants because that's their space to actually bring in the experience to help build out the IT roadmap.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. I think what you're describing, Nura, is that IT roadmap and planning is a collaborative process. And it can't happen without the technical expertise, but it also can't happen without an understanding of what the organization needs, of the, as we like to call it, the business needs of the organization. And good IT roadmap creation and IT planning and strategy development synthesizes those two expertises. And so in terms of this last question, what skill set and background does someone need? They need both. They need both a business understanding of what the organization needs. They also need a technical understanding. And in our experience, it works well when it's a collaborative process.
That seems like a great point to go to the next slide with an example of what a roadmap might look like, so people can know it's not like 200 pages long dissertation or something about your IT strategy. It can be a pretty simple document where you put in the different, as you can see across, this is an example, an initiative, recommendation, the urgency, the complexity, and what the impact is going to have. And so then you can have more of a visual way to set your priorities and maybe talk about your budget and how you're going to do the things that need to happen. Can you go to the next slide with the when should you outsource? Because there's a couple of questions about that. So,
yeah. Well, we've tried to touch on that a little bit about the times when it makes sense to outsource IT. So I think some rules of thumb that we have are that the smaller you are as an organization, the more cost effective it is to outsource your IT. And that's really because, as I think should be clear from looking at the position slide, there are a wide range of expertises that are required in order for IT to be successful. There's IT management expertise, there's technical expertise at both a basic as well as an advanced technical level. And it's just very hard to create that expertise in a scalable way inside the organization. So for smaller organizations, the ideal arrangement is you have an accidental techie who is familiar enough with IT that they can manage the support relationship and hold the vendor accountable, but that they're not really expected to do most of the work themselves, and the outsourced provider is able to provide that work in a really scalable way. And then as organizations start to get larger, the 100 is sort of a magic tipping point for organizations where they move from being what we call SMB, small and medium-sized businesses, into what's known as the mid-market. And there's just sort of a fundamental change that happens in the nature of organizations at that size. They just take on greater complexity, and that is reflected in their IT needs. And it can start to become challenging to meet those greater complexities effectively solely through an outsourced provider. So somewhere on that journey, somewhere between 10 and 100, you're starting to create in-house IT capacity. And I think ideally you're doing it in a way as an organization that is closely aligned with your strategic plan and your fundamental needs to accomplish your mission.
So our first question in the Q&A was, our accidental techie does not have the expertise to continue in this direction, but we do not have a big enough or consistent enough need to hire a tech employee. So what is the next best step? And I kind of feel like you just maybe had mentioned it.
Yeah, I think, depending on the size, I think outsourcing makes the most sense. And if that's something that the accidental techie is on board with and supportive of, then they will gladly welcome that, and they can actually be ideally given a lead responsibility in identifying and helping to onboard the outsourced provider.
And so then does that accidental techie, whatever their role actually is or their job description, like often the person who is, kind of maintaining that relationship or hiring the outsourced IT support would be like the CFO or some other director. So then the accidental techie is kind of an intermediary. Is that how it can work?
Yeah, what we actually what we prefer in our engagements is that there be kind of 2 points of contact. There's the day-to-day point of contact, the person who's interfacing directly with the IT business manager, or, if it's good to have somebody within the organization whose staff can go to if they're running into any issues, or if they have questions. Oh, I forgot, who do I call to get help? That sort of thing. And especially if the accidental techie has skills to handle really basic and simple technical needs, they can continue to resolve those if they have time to do it in their workload. And then you would have sort of the business point of contact, the person who's managing the contract and the relationship, and maybe is engaged in occasional long-term planning discussions as well.
Yes, that's really more effective, as you mentioned, Johan, having someone to help with that planning and collaborate on any strategic IT roadmaps that they would be interested in building. So those 2 tiers, I've seen those as a win-win situation rather than just having someone that's not really engaging with the outsourced IT company.
That is a great segue into the next question, which is, I'm a couple of years into working at a nonprofit, and there's a big difference between leadership prioritizing IT in comparison with corporate. However, what guidance do you have to help gain support from leadership on the importance of IT and prioritizing vital projects for organizational improvement? I feel like this could be its own webinar, but if you have a couple of thoughts.
Yeah, this is a tough one. I mean, this is a question that comes up a lot, and there's, part of it is, how do you influence leadership at your organization? And that's different for every organization. And that's kind of a universal challenge. Like, figuring out how to manage up is something that is needed in all different areas, not just IT. So I won't weigh in on sort of the specifics of that, because it varies widely from organization to organization. I do think that when it comes to IT, one of the big challenges, or one of the things you can do, is demystify it. So I think oftentimes senior leadership doesn't understand IT, or they feel like it's all technical and it's confusing, and maybe it frightens them. It makes them feel inadequate as leaders potentially. So the more you can do to demystify IT and get out of the jargon, I'm a firm believer that every IT concept can be explained in a way that anybody can understand it, and can be connected to the priorities that your leaders have for the organization. And so that's really the challenge. You should, work with an IT support provider who's able to assist you with that process. Don't let them talk to you in jargon. Don't let them hide behind technical concepts. They should be able to explain everything that was on that roadmap slide should connect back to a business priority. And if you can frame those needs in terms of business priorities, you might have more luck with your leadership. Not a guarantee, because of those sort of the unique factors, that we all know exist in every organization.
That's a great answer. I want to make sure we get to the slide with the next webinar, which I think is the next one. Yep. So if I can invite everyone back. We are taking the month off in December with our webinars. We hope all of your holiday galas are wonderful and your fundraising goals are met. And our next webinar will be our traditional tech trends roundtable, which is always one of our most popular webinars. And we're splitting it into 2 parts. In January, our panel of our executives and experts will be taking your questions and discussing tech trends that every nonprofit needs to know about. So we'll talk about the way our offices work now, cybersecurity, and just some basics that we expect to continue shaping our sector. And really every nonprofit, no matter how tech savvy you are or not tech savvy you are, you need to have these fundamentals in place and understand how these trends are working. And as we usually do, we're also going to look back on our predictions from 2022 and see what came true, which is always a fun exercise. And Johan, you'll be returning, and our other experts, Matt and Eshelman on cybersecurity, and Steve Longenecker on cloud computing, will be talking about those aspects of modern offices. And in February, for part 2, we're going to branch out and talk a little bit more about what's on the horizon or already arriving that nonprofits can be thinking about, what trends we see shaping the next 3 to 5 years, how you can maximize your investments, gear up your IT roadmap toward those emerging best practices and tools. And this is such a good, packed, and informative webinar, so we split it into 2 parts. And I think, Nura, you're coming back for February, and Johan, you are as well. So those are going to be on January 18th at 3 p.m. Eastern, noon Pacific. The one in February will be on the 15th. I think I can read through our learning objectives, which we didn't quite have time to hit the last one about the virtual CIO, but I hope that you're all familiar with typical IT job descriptions and roles. You learned about some of the experience and qualifications. If you need more information about that, we have a couple of resources I'm going to share in the transcript for this. Understanding in general when to outsource, when to build your talent in-house, when to hire, finding, as we said, and I put in the photo, the unicorns, the people who can do the technology and the management and strategy. It's really hard to find those people. So as Johan said, sometimes you just need to find an outsourced partner that's going to learn your business over time with you and be able to be a trusted resource to you around that. I want to thank you, Johan and Nura, so much for being with us today and sharing your years of experience on this. I want to thank everybody who attended. Thank you for spending an hour with us to learn about this. And I hope you have a great rest of your afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you for joining this Community IT Podcast Part 2. You can find Part 1 in your podcast feed if you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Community IT does these free webinars and podcasts for our community, and we love sharing our knowledge and experience. If you have more questions or are having trouble with your IT at your nonprofit, please get in touch with us on our website, www.communityit.com, so we can start a conversation or schedule an assessment. Downloading any of our free resources there will get you signed up for our webinar reminders, and you can attend our next webinar in real time and ask our experts your own questions. If you love podcasts, please subscribe and leave us a rating to help others find this leadership resource for nonprofits.